This class is the Schus Alex Klein, Avraham Shmuel, and Aryeh Leib, and his neshama should have an aliyah, and the ultimate aliyah is the resurrection of the dead with the coming of Mashiach now. Amen. So we're learning a Gemara, the Ein Yaakov, in the tractate of Bava Basra, and it's extremely appropriate what we're learning, because going this evening we begin a very, very special time on the Jewish calendar, which is the month of Elul, which is the month where we take a reckoning of the entire year. It's a month that's devoted to a person calculating and making a reckoning of everything that transpired in their lives over the course of the entire previous year. And just like a physical business that a person runs, if they're merely running their business and they don't have time to make an accounting of what's happening, to do an audit, a self-audit, and so on, it could be that they're bleeding money. It could be that it doesn't matter how much money looks like is going through the bank accounts back and forth. If a person doesn't do an accounting exactly what's happening, for all they know, they could be losing their pants. This is a reality. And it's the same thing for a Jewish person. Over the course of the year, the Jewish people are involved in three main activities. One of them is the activity of the study of Torah, that a Jew's mission on earth is to accumulate the knowledge of Torah. And we just learned in the Gemara, right before the piece that we're learning today, that when a person passes away, they come l'mayla to heaven. One of the announcements that are made is Ashrei mi shabalakan the Talmud biyadei. Fortunate, happy is the one who has arrived here with Torah, Talmud biyadei. So that's one thing Jews are engaged with and in throughout the entire year. And comes a month where it's time to think about, where am I holding in terms of true Torah development? How much have I actually changed my mind? That my mind thinks like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like the Rebbeinu Shalom. That my mind is one with the mind of Torah. Which is really what learning Torah is all about, that our mind becomes intimate with the divine. Because what we understand literally becomes our mind, becomes our identity. And a Jew is here to understand Torah, not to repeat words. It should make sense to him. He has to spend hours, he or she has to spend hours struggling and trying to understand until the Jew's mind is a Torah mind. And that's what it means when a soul passes away. We say, Talmud biyadei, that fortunate is the soul who brings the Torah with him, that he's become one with the Torah. So this is something that a Jew really has to ask themselves, where are they holding in terms of the development in Torah, and specifically and uniquely, the study that we are learning together, which is the Ein Yaakov, actually has this special quality in a way more than other parts of the Torah, because it's actually the part of Torah which is specifically trying to focus on the most relevant elements of our life. How a Jew views the world, how a Jew approaches everything within life, not just the law, but has to do with the way you think. Okay, so that's one thing Jews are focused on throughout the year. The other thing Jews are focused on throughout the year is mitzvahs. The fulfillment of mitzvahs. Are you growing, or are you growing weaker? It's a serious question. Where are you holding? Every year has to be like a ladder. You're greater in terms of fulfillment of mitzvahs than the previous year. You're more religious every year because you're smarter every year. The smarter you are, the more mitzvahs you do. I just got that line from the Rebbe. I heard the Rebbe speaking to a convention of women, and that's what he says. He said in Yiddish, that we get smarter every year, and therefore we get more religious every year. But in terms of mitzvahs, again, this is a very, very special month where we sit down and we're very seriously and cool-headedly think about the question of where we're holding. And finally, what a Jew is working on is their character. Midas tovos. how we relate to other people and other Jews, and how have we changed? If we're a person who has anger, have we destroyed that emotion? If we're an arrogant person, have we destroyed that emotion? What good quality character traits have we developed, and so on? As we shall see in the Gemara we're learning today, how connected all of this is in terms of development and these questions of what are we actually doing with our lives, and are we truly connecting with the divine, and are we being our truest self? Are we living up to the unbelievable potential that each and every one of us has, and we really know that we have it. Everyone understands their incredible depth, but they're searching for a way to express it and develop it, and that's what Yiddishkeit provides for us, the path that we could go beyond our own limitations and live our best life. Okay, so what we're looking at in the Gemara is, I'm going to go up a drop from the beginning of the statement. We began reading it last time, but this is the piece. And let's go through the piece without too much commentary. And then when we're done, let's have a discussion. Okay. Says the Brisa, Tanya. It was taught in a Brisa. Brisa means that it's a teaching from the times of the Tanoim. The Tanoim spanned from the 1st century BCE, before the Common Era, to the end of the 2nd century of the Common Era, so about a 300-year period. And specifically from the names that we're about to read, this is actually from the rabbis who lived through the destruction of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem in the year 70. This is probably in the court of Yavne, after the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So this would probably be around the year 80 this takes place. Tanya was taught in a Brisa, Amar Lahen, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Talmidov. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the leader of his generation, he asked his students. And if you're familiar with the ethics of our fathers, chapter 2, you'll know that in chapter 2 over there, Mishnah 9, it describes the 5 main students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So actually we're going to mention some of them here, and then we're going to mention some other individuals. There's actually going to be 5 opinions in the verse. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked his students, and he says, Banai, my children, what does this pasuk mean? What does the following verse mean? It's a verse in Proverbs, one of the 3 books in the Jewish Bible, in the only Bible, we should say, the book of Mishli, the Proverbs, and he writes the following: Staka tereimim goy, the chesed leumim chatos. Righteousness, or tzedakah, charity, tereimim goy, elevates, uplifts, exalts a nation. The chesed and the kindness of peoples is sin. What's the meaning of the statement? How could kindness be sin? What are these 2 references to a goy, to leumim, to nations? So he received a few responses. Then Rabbi Eliezer responded. This is the famous Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkinus, Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, the great Rabbi Eliezer. He said the following. He said, Staka tereimim goy elu Yisrael. When it says that righteousness uplifts and exalts a nation, it's referring to the Jewish people. Why would where do you find this? A goy. He says, it says, Umi kamcha Yisrael, goy echad ba'aretz. Okay. Okay. If I'm trying to see, I'm trying to mute someone, but I can't find it. Okay, fine. It is what it is. Okay, it just got better. Fine, perfect. So the Gemara says, so he says like this. It says, "Umi kamcha Yisrael v'yachad ba'aretz." Who is like your nation, Israel? One goy ba'aretz.
Everything? Yep. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Which famously translates, who is like your nation Israel? A goy, a nation who brings echad, ba'aretz, who brings unity and oneness.
Oh, by the way, did you give me these sauces also?
Let's see if what
That
we
one?
can do about
Perfect.
this.
Thank you so much.
Mendel, tell him to mute himself.
I'm trying. Oh, here it is. Now I'm able to mute. I was trying to figure out. Okay, fine. I can't find who's speaking. So whoever you are, see if you can mute yourself. Okay.
I'm going to call him out. It's Uri Abramov is the name.
I'm wondering why it's not coming up on the list when I go to manage participants. Oh. Okay. Okay. Fine. It's not on the list here. In any event, let's stay focused and hopefully we'll be able to deal with it. So, goy echad ba'aretz. A goy which even ba'aretz, even in the physical world, the physical reality, which seems to contradict oneness, there seems to be compartmentalization. Everything seems divided. There seems to be so much distraction. We Jews bring about the oneness into aretz. Goy echad ba'aretz. So when it said the word goy, staka tereimim goy, that staka uplifts a goy, it's referring to the Jewish people. What's the second half of the pasuk going on? The chesed leumim chatos, that kindness of the nations is a sin. So he says, called staka v'chesed, all the charity and kindness that the nations do is a sin for them. Why? They only do it to elevate their prestige, or as the Maharsha explains, to extend their power. And he brings a source from the book of Ezra, and I'll just say it in English, that they may sacrifice offerings of pleasing aroma to God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and his sons. That even though they donated to the temple in Jerusalem, the king of Cyrus, they were doing it in order for their own benefit. That's the Gemara. The Gemara now asks the obvious question. We know that there's a principle in Judaism that even if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, you should still go ahead and do it. Why make such a drastic statement? So that's where the Gemara immediately asks. And someone who does this, lav, stakar, gmurehi, is this not full-fledged tzedakah? Is this not the full merit of tzedakah b'hatanya? But we learned in another brayse, and you'll remember a brayse means a teaching from that era that I spoke about. What did it say? The brayse is the following, and this is an extremely famous brayse. I'm glad that all of you and all of us are able to learn it together. You should know this brayse. Ha'omer sela zelet tzedakah, shvil sheyichyu banai. A person gives a sela, which is a currency, a certain amount of money to charity, and he says, in order that my children should live, or that my son should live, my child should live. Ubishvil, alternatively, for the sake, she'ezke la'olam haba, I should merit the world to come. Says the Braise, harei zet tzaddik gomer. This person is a complete tzaddik, a tzaddik gomer. So it's a big question. Why are you declaring it? So there's ulterior motives that makes it a sin. And the Gemara gives a very confounding answer on its face. But it says it's not a question. Like kasha, it's not difficult. There's a difference. Kan be Yisrael, kan be B'kichon. This is with the Jew and this is with the Gentile. When a Gentile does it for the wrong reasons, it's a sin. When a Jew apparently does it for the wrong reasons, it's not a sin. So for now, for the sake of this conversation, let's just go with Rashi. The most basic commentary on the Gemara is Rashi. Rashi was born in the year 1040, passed away in the year 1105. He's the greatest commentary that ever lived on the Talmud. He's the Rabban shel kol bnei Yisrael, the teacher of every Jewish child until a Jew passes away, in every area of Torah, the ultimate master, the ultimate teacher, Rashi, which is what Rashi actually stands for, Rabban shel Yisrael, even though it also stands for his name, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, because his father's name was Yitzchak. So he wanted that, in order to honor Kibud Av, to honor his father, he had the name Yitzchaki always added to his name. Rab Shlomo, his name was Shlomo, Yitzchaki, the Yitzchakite, because his father was Shloimeh. And in fact, it's fascinating, the very opening commentary to the Chumash, to the is by Rashi, says, Amr Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says. And the commentaries say that he did this in order to open up with Kibud Av. That there's an idea that you should open up with respect and awe of one's parents. So what does Rashi tell us on this Gemara? So Rashi says like this. Rashi says that a Jew who gives the tzedakah and his son ends up dying is not mitcharet. He does not regret giving the tzedakah. And really, his mind is to the heaven, whether his son lives or he dies. In other words, really, it was not conditional. He says a Jew could say the words. He could say, oh, I'm giving it in order my son should live. But the Jew, whether his son lives or dies, he's still happy that he gave the tzedakah. It's all good. The main thing is that he did the mitzvah, he gave the tzedakah. He doesn't judge God. He understands that God runs this world. Ultimately and fundamentally, he gave the tzedakah for the right reason. He says, versus a Gentile, if he doesn't get what he wanted, he regrets it. He regrets it. That's what he writes. Now, it seems to be a drastic statement. All Jews, all Gentiles. But let's leave it at that for now, and we'll discuss it further as we move along. However, that's what Rashi says, that there's a certain sensitivity of a Jewish soul that even if consciously he thinks that he's doing it for heaven, let's say, that it should merit the world to come, really, even if he doesn't have the world to come, he's still happy that he gave tzedakah. He's still happy that he did the mitzvah. Even if his son dies, he's still happy that he did the mitzvah. It was really a selfless act. It really was not an act which was coming from ego. There's an unbelievable story of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidus. He was born in the year 1698 and passed away in the year 1760. He revealed himself and came out with the Hasidic movement in the year 1734. My family happens to be direct descendants from him. My father's the 10th generation from the Baal Shem Tov, from the holy Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. And we have a story passed down in our family that we relate every Passover from the Baal Shem Tov. And there's one part, it's a very long story, but one part of the story which actually relates to this beautifully, and which is that at a certain part of the story, it actually took place in Turkey. He was on his way to Israel. The Baal Shem Tov tried making it to Israel. That's the story. So the Baal Shem Tov, when he was in Turkey, for whatever reason, there was a couple who helped him out in an unbelievable way over Passover. And he asked them, he said, what blessing could I give you? And they were an incredibly wealthy couple. And they told the Baal Shem Tov that we're not lacking for money, we're not lacking for fame, honor, comfortability, all of that we have. There's one thing we're lacking in life, we don't have children. We've tried, we're married many, many years, there's no children on the horizon. And Baal Shem Tov gave them a bracha, a blessing. He said that this time next year, you should have a son, you should have a child. And immediately the Baal Shem Tov caused a tremendous ruckus in heaven. Why? Because it was decreed that this couple would never in a million years have children. And in order for God to give them children, the entire universe had to be turned upside down. The puzzle has to be switched around. The whole thing doesn't make sense. Entire missions, entire souls, everything had to be turned upside down. And they decided that the Baal Shem Tov's punishment, we have to listen to the word of a tzaddik. A tzaddik decrees, Hashem says, I listen. But the Baal Shem Tov had such audacity, it was such chutzpah. What he did, they came out with a heavenly voice, came out, Baal Shem Tov heard it, of course, which said that Rabbi Yisrael has lost his portion of the world to come. So what do you think his reaction was? What would your reaction be? You hear such an announcement from the heavenly court, all the judges, all the angels, they declare you have no portion in the world to come. You've lost, you've forfeited your portion in the world to come. So the Baal Shem Tov actually, a massive smile came to his face, and he exploded with joy. And he said, Baruch Hashem, thank God. Baruch Hashem. Why Baruch Hashem? He said, now I could have thought that I'm doing the mitzvahs for the sake of heaven. But now I know for a fact that I know I'm not going to have heaven. I lost Eilam Haba. So Baruch Hashem, finally I have it off. It's a headache that I don't have to deal with anymore. I don't have to worry about Gan Eden, not Gan Eden, heaven, no heaven. I can do it for the right reasons in order to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then promptly another voice came out from heaven saying that he got back Eilam Haba, with dividends plus for his attitude of feeling that way and so on. So that's what it says over here, that even if a person says Bishvil she'ez kelo Eilam Haba, the second example given by the Gemara, in order that I merit the world to come, nevertheless, for a Jew, Harei zeh tzaddik gomer. Continuing with the Gemara, and you'll see in a moment that all the students, or most of the students, go in the same theme. They focus on a different element of what drives the ego, what they believe is the ultimate ego force driving a person's activity to give tzedakah and to be righteous in general. Okay, so we just had the first one of Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol. Now Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua, another student of Rabbi Yechim ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yeshua responded to the challenge of Rabbi Yechim ben Zakkai and interpreted the verse thus. Staka elevates, exalts, and a goy, a nation, is going on the Jewish people, Yisrael. And he brings the same pasuk the other one brought. It says, Mi ka'amcha Yisrael ve'echad ba'aretz, who is like your nation, O Israel? One goy in the land. V'chesed u'mimchatos means the following. Called staka v'chesed shum yisrael ha'maisin, that all the staka and the chesed and the kindness that the Goyim, the Gentiles, do, Chetulin is a sin. Why? They're doing it only in order to perpetuate their dominion. And he brings a proof again that Nebuchadnezzar saw that he had a decree against him from heaven, a tremendous decree, the famous dream, the writing on the wall. Many people don't know where that comes from. It comes from the book of Daniel. There was a big story in public. They saw a hand who wrote on the wall. No one could interpret the message until Daniel came and he was able to translate what it meant. And it was a terrible decree against the king, Nebuchadnezzar. So Daniel said, I have advice for you, my king. And of course, a big portion of the book of Daniel is written in Aramaic. So this pasuk is actually a pasuk in Aramaic in the Bible. A pasuk written in Aramaic. He says, Lehein malkam milki yishfar alayich. Therefore, my king, my counsel should be acceptable to you, and you could deal with your sin through charity. And your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, and so there you should have an extension to your serenity. So we see that he says, this is the motivating factor, because Nebuchadnezzar was the most powerful king that ever lived, and really it was the sake of the kingdom, of the continuation of his kingdom. What is Rabbi Yeshua adding that the first one did not bring? So the Maharal of Prague says that it's actually worse than the first one. Because the first one is that it's for my own good. What am I going to get out of it? So a person, in a way, so even though that's egotistical, how will I gain from it? What do I get out of it? But it's like a weak kind of ego. It's okay, shvachem isis. That's your whole. That's what makes you feel big. You get to, it's people whose biggest greatness in life is to be able to satisfy a hunger, satisfy a desire, a passion. So it's about you. It's egotistical, but it's not real ego. What demonstrates a much greater ego is, as the Maharal explains, and we're not going to get into, but we actually touched upon it in the last class, which is nationalism. Nationalism. Yeshua says, and it's interesting that these characters who are having this discussion were actually living in a time when they were just vanquished in terms of the Jewish people. Our nation was destroyed. The temple was destroyed. Jerusalem was razed to the ground. The Jewish people, over 90,000 Jews were sold into slavery to Rome. The Roman people, of course, were on a victory march for years after, and about their kingdom, and so on. So it's interesting how Rabbi Yeshua says in his challenge, he says that actually I think a more degenerate, a lower level of ego, place where it comes from is that, and it could look selfless, but he says it's not selfless at all. It's actually the greatest ego you could have. how big is your ego going to be already? Your little desires, your little life. But if you attach your ego to a greater ego, that I'm great because I'm part of a great people, and this people were, and it's all about ego, power, fame, and extending the reach of that people. So you just want to have a bigger ego. So in a way, Rabbi Yeshua, that's what Rabbi Yeshua is saying. In a way that this is the ultimate ego, and he says that there's a concept of doing kindness for the sake of perpetuating their power. Interesting idea. That's Rabbi Yeshua's approach. Now we're ready for the third approach. Rabbi Gamliel was there, and he responded. It's interesting to note that even though I said before that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the greatest leader of the generation, I believe Rabbi Gamliel was actually the Nasi of the Sanhedrin. Meaning the 71, the court of 71 judges, which still existed for up to 200 years after the destruction of the temple. Until today, all of the Judaism that we practice and all the obligations we keep are defined by the decisions and the rulings of the Supreme Court of Israel, which the Torah tells us in this week's Torah portion, Parsha Shoftim, whatever the Supreme Court tells you, listen to what they say. And do not sway right or left from what they tell you. That's a quote. Which is just as an aside, parenthetically, is an interesting point to always acknowledge and realize. Many people make the argument, they say, the rabbis of the Talmud are infallible. I think I'm reading the verse, maybe I'm going to read differently than them. Maybe I have a different opinion. Every decree they make is a good decree. Maybe it's not so applicable anymore. Maybe I don't need to keep that decree. So their response is that you're making a great point. Kol hakavod, you're a smart guy. Smart aleck, but there's one problem, only one issue. Fundamentally, we don't even care about that. Meaning, even if you happen to be right, even if the rabbis were wrong, doesn't matter. The Torah says, listen to the Sanhedrin. So really, fundamentally, it really doesn't even make a difference. Torah says that their understanding, what they said, is the understanding of the halacha. Ben dam ledam, ben din ledin, ben nagel lenagel, whatever law, whatever decree, right? Al tasser min adabra sheyigidu lecha. Don't stray from whatever they tell you. So this is the Sanhedrin. So in the Sanhedrin, Rabbi Gamliel was actually the Nasi. He came from the lineage of Hillel Hazaken. He was a great grandson of Hillel, the famous Hillel, and he was the Nasi. In the court, there was the one who sat basically in the seat of Moses himself. Was the greatest one of the court, Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was actually more like the leader of the generation in general. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai actually was a position in the Sanhedrin called the Av Bezdin, the father of the Bezdin. There's two main people on the top of the Sanhedrin, and under him was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So Rabbi Gamliel also takes up the challenge that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai offered in this pasuk. Rabbi Gamliel answered and said, stock uplifts the nation. It's going on Israel. Like it says, so fine. He says, follow. Cold stuck of chesed sha'akum eisin chetulen. Whatever staka and chesed that the akum do is a sin for them. Why? Shein eisin elalis yahar b'ay. V'chol hamisyaher noifel b'gehenim. So all the commentaries discuss, he's the only one who doesn't bring a proof for what he's saying. Everyone else brings a proof that this is how nations act. He just says a fact. He says they perform, everything they do is for the sake of haughtiness. The sake of haughtiness. To feel haughty, to feel great. Shnamar, and he says, and whoever is haughty falls into Gehenna. He falls into the purgatory. Purgatory in Judaism is that when a person goes to heaven, in order to merit the world to come, and in order to go to a place where you bask in the presence of God, you have to go to a washing machine. Why? Because in order to be able to have that experience, anything which separates you from Hashem, any ego whatsoever, has to be dealt with. That's why every thought, speech, or action that we have in our entire lifetime is dealt with first. And there's different ways that it's dealt with. And one of them is called Gehenna. Gehenna is one of the ways that these things are dealt with. So he says the ultimate separation from God is feeling arrogant, feeling haughty. Famously elsewhere, the Gemara says that being haughty is the equivalent of idolatry. Because essentially, what is idolatry? People make a big mistake. People think that idolatry is that you don't believe in God, you believe in some other deity. That's actually not what idolatry is. A person could fully and totally believe in God, believe in Hashem, believe Hashem created the world and created everything, and still be an idolater, halachically. Be stoned to death, a 100% idolater. How so? Because you have to understand what paganism is, what idolatry is, especially how it began. The world used to be all monotheist, with the first man, Adam, monotheist. How did it begin? It began in the generation of Enosh, and they made a fundamental mistake. And what the mistake they made was, they said that out of respect to God, out of respect to the Rebbeinu Shalom, you have to respect Hashem's creation. You have to respect the powers that Hashem put into the world. And if you don't have a proper respect for the mechanisms that Hashem set up in this world, that's disrespectful to God. You don't value the power of the things that He set up, the things that control our world. And when you begin to study this understanding of Avodah Zarah, which is that it's not that you believe that there's any power besides for God. So that is called creating another God. There's God, and then there's another power, whatever it may be. It may even be a business, by the way. It may be the financial market. You say, I have respect. What are you respecting? Hashem controls the world. Where were they wrong? Why were they wrong? Not because we're not thankful to God for all the mechanisms that He put into place. We thank God every day for giving us the sun. We talk about how amazing the sun is, the source of energy, light, warmth, etc., etc. It's not that we're not, but we see the sun as the gift that Hashem gave us, and that it's an axe being wielded in the hands of the wood chopper. When's the last time you gave a plaque to the axe? When's the last time you give a plaque to the tractor? Who talks about the tractor? Talk about the one who drives the tractor, who drives the tractor. So that's what Avodah Zarah is. And being that that's the core definition of Avodah Zarah, of paganism, of idolatry, therefore, ego and arrogance is actually in its core the ultimate definition of idolatry. That you believe in something besides for God. You believe in a power outside of Hashem. That's why he says, Kol misyar noifel begehenim. Whoever is arrogant, haughty, falls into Gehenna, to the ultimate separation from God. They need to be transformed completely. And by the way, that's why we talk about the fires of Gehenna. What's the fires? There's physical fires burning in Gehenna. Because just like when we kasher something, it's interesting to note, some things it's hard to kasher. How does kashrus really work? We need to purge a vessel from the tastes that it's absorbed from the not kosher food. So we pour boiling hot water into the vessel, and that will get out the tastes, whatever's in it. But then there's certain things that can never be taken out because it's become so one with the vessel, it can never be taken out. For example, an earthenware vessel. You can't make it kosher, an earthenware vessel, china and so on. So what is a person to do if they have something which is very sentimental to them, very meaningful to them? It's their grandmother's, and it became not kosher. What are they supposed to do? So the typical rabbi will tell you, put it as decoration. Put it on your fireplace. Put it in a glass. Everyone look at it, and it's beautiful. You don't have to drink from it. It's very sentimental. But what if a person insists, I want to use it and so on? Is there a way out? So there actually is only one way out for earthenware. You have to be hooked. You have to hook yourself up. But what you have to do is it has to be put into a kiln. And when you put it in a kiln, you transform the entire thing, and it's a brand new entity. And now it could be kept. Now a kiln is going to totally transform it. That's why it's called a kiln. A kiln is we put a fire to approximately 1400 or 1600 degrees. That's what we put it into, the thing that makes it originally an earthenware vessel. You're going to ask, why doesn't it crack when you put it into a kiln? For a very simple reason. Why do things crack in general? Because when you put something in heat, it causes it to expand. When the different parts of the vessel are not heated exactly at the same points as each other, then one part is expanding and the other part is not expanding at the same rate. That causes it to crack. However, what they do special with a kiln is they have the fire in such a special way that every square inch and centimeter is being focused on with the exact same time, with the same intensity of the fire and so on. And that's considered a transformation. And that's what we mean, that's also part of what we mean when we talk about Gehenna. The Gehenna, this person has become so identified with their ego. When they say I, when they say me, they're not talking about their true selves. They're talking about their ego. Therefore, Kol HaMisyair says the Gemara, says Rabbi Gamliel, the Nasi of the Bezdin, the leader of the Bezdin. Rabbi Gamliel says, whoever is Misyair needs to go to Gehenna, needs to be fundamentally transformed. And he brings a proof from a verse, also from Proverbs. It says, the proud and haughty one, scorner is his name. They act in arrogant wrath. They bring about wrath. And he brings a proof from another verse that whenever it says the word wrath, it means Gehenna. Wrath means nothing other than Gehenna, as it is stated, that day is a day of wrath. Yom Evra Hayoim Hahu. So Rabbi Gamliel argues and says that the non-Jews in general, he says, they identify with their ego. And he says, therefore, that's why Rabbi Gamliel is the only one of these rabbis who doesn't feel the need to bring a proof. Because he's saying that you guys are all getting into the nitty-gritty. How is the ego expressing itself? This one says for your own good, for a longer life, so on. This one says that for nationalistic reasons, perpetuate your control, your dominion, your nation, your people. Rabbi Gamliel says, let's go to the core of it. It's coming from an egotistical place. It's coming from a place of arrogance. And that is more than enough of an explanation about why it would be a sinful idea. Now we'll say the final shot, even though there's one more afterwards, but it's a totally different explanation, which has nothing to do with the previous people's explanation. Rabbi Gamliel said, we still need, all three of us still need to come on to Rabbi Eliezer HaMoidoi. Rabbi Eliezer from Moidoi. Moidoi is famous, many of you may know it from the Hanukkah story, the rebellion against the Greeks, which happened, of course, 200 years before this, more than 200 years before this, but it started in Moidoi. So Rabbi Eliezer HaMoidoi is one of the famous Tanoim. You'll find him in the Mishnah a lot. He says, we all need to come on to Rabbi Eliezer HaMoidoi. What does he say? He says, Staka Treimim Goy is going on the Jewish people. Shnemar Mikam Chisol, who's like the Jewish people, Gechabatos. Chesed Mimchatos, the kindness and the stock of the Goyim is a nation, is a sin. Why? She'ein Oisit Elu L'charei Feisanu Boy. They're only doing it to taunt us with it. Shnemar, and he brings a proof that we find that when the Nuvazardan, who was the general against the Jewish people, he did something nice to Jeremiah the prophet, and he said, "This is all happening to you because your nation, you the Jewish people, have sinned against the Lord. You haven't obeyed His voice. That's why this happened to you." Eliezer HaMoidoi says that this is the most negative thing of all. More than what anyone else said, this is the worst thing that they could do. And this is one of the worst things a person could do in general. The ultimate expression of ego is when you're doing something in order to taunt someone else, to say that I'm better than you. Many of you may be familiar with people doing that in your life or in your surroundings. There's someone who will do something merely in order to feel superior to you and to be able to denigrate the other person. And specifically, he says, the nations many times will do this to do it to the Jewish people and say, we're so pure, we're so righteous, and you, the Jewish people, aren't on our level. Why is he making such a big statement out of it and saying that we all need to come on to the explanation of Rabbi Eliezer HaMoidoi? Why is he the ultimate explanation? So I saw a few explanations. I'm only going to say one that spoke to me. It made sense to me. And that was, someone pointed out that actually, it's not explicit in the Torah, a commandment to the non-Jews not to be arrogant. So, in other words, nationalism, for example, is not necessarily a bad thing. Nationalism could be a positive force in the universe. And many would say that capitalism is based on ego. In other words, ego itself could lead to a good outcome. There's nothing, for a Jew, there's a specific commandment that's considered evil because a Jew is supposed to recognize the oneness of the universe. A Jew is supposed to be in touch with Hashem Echad, one God, and in the presence of God, there's no room for any power and any ego outside of God. Like we were quoting the verse the whole time, Goy Echad Ba'aretz, that Jews bring Echad, the nation which brings Echad Ba'aretz into the earth, into the earthiness. Fine. However, where is there an explicit commandment? We're turning it into a whole sin. The nations of the world are giving tzedakah out of ego, and therefore it's sinful. Where's the commandment? You could go through the list of the 7 Noahide laws that non-Jews are commanded. You're not going to find it in the list. So the commentary that I saw says, that's why he says, Rabbi Gamliel said, we all need to come on to the explanation of Rabbi Eliezer HaMudoi. Why? Because one of the 7 Noahide laws incumbent upon all mankind is the commandment, the injunction, not to curse God. Not to be mecharef u'megadef, to curse and denigrate God's name. God's name, yeah, it's one of the 7. Not to curse God. And Rashi says that the ones who represent God on earth is the Jewish people. Many people are searching for explanations for anti-Semitism. Is it this? Is it that? We all know the explanations are nonsense, for the simple reason that every person gives a different explanation and they're all contradictory to each other. Are the Jews capitalists, the ultimate capitalists, or are they the communists? Are the Jews too rich, or are the Jews too poor? Are they sucking off society? They're not being productive, or they're too productive? Are the Jews everywhere? They mingling too much? Everywhere you go, there's Jews? Or are the Jews keeping to themselves? Why do they think they're better than us? And if you go through the list, whatever you want, you're going to find a counter-argument about this is the reason for anti-Semitism. Ultimately and fundamentally, it boils down to the fact that Jews represent a path through the jungle of history. The Jews represent God. Whether a Jew likes it or not, whether they think they represent it or not, they could be a self-hating Jew walking down Fifth Avenue. That's what they represent. You say, I'm Jewish. That very word means that for thousands of years, your ancestors have represented the Torah. Until today, you represent the Torah to the vast majority of mankind. That's what a Jew is. And therefore, Rashi mentions this. Rashi mentions that's why revenge against Midian is considered revenge against God, because the Jewish people and God are interchangeable in this expression. Same thing with Amalek. So therefore, where do you find an explicit prohibition against this, where it's sinful? It could be considered a sin. The tzedakah and chesed that the goyim are doing. He says when they use it to feel superior to the Jewish people and say that I don't need to come on to the morality of the Jewish people and what the Jewish people represents and the God of Israel, and why do I not need to come on to that? Because I'm really better than the Jewish person. They use their kindness. Really, it's not real kindness. It's not coming from a godly place. It's merely meant as a source of denigration against the Jewish people, of cursing the Jewish people. The word mechadet in Hebrew literally means cursing. So he says that's why we all need to come on to Rabbi Eliezer HaMudai's explanation, because based on his explanation, that is where you see an explicit commandment that, so to speak, they are transgressing, and that's what he says. Now, I was planning originally to just get through the Gemara and then begin a discussion and explanation. What we ended up doing is we just got through the Gemara and that in itself took up plenty of time. But Mirz Hashem, God willing, by next week we'll delve further and learn the Gemara further, and by then we'll already be deep in the month of Elul, which is one of the most, like we mentioned in the outset, one of the most special months of the year of the Jewish people, and we're supposed to increase in tzedakah over the course of this coming month. And it's where we make a calculation, a din v'cheshbon, where we question ourselves about everything that we are doing and so on. And so hopefully this Gemara could serve as an inspiration in that service of God, and it should be an inspiration to all of us. And once again, this share is b'schus, any inspiration that we have, and any title we're learning, and this is b'schus Avraham Shmuel ben Aryeh Leib.
Amen.
Everyone should have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.